Good morning, friends, and welcome once again to this lecture number 27. Taking our discussion on the terms and terminologies and concepts associated with diaspora further, in this particular lecture, I propose to talk about transnationalism and unhomely, two much used concepts, especially in the parlance of migration studies and diaspora. So, friends, transnationalism, when we disambiguate it or if we break it, we will come to know that going beyond nationalism, or to put it straight, going beyond the boundaries of a nation or nation state. So, if we try to understand it, it refers to the process by which immigrants or people maintain active connections and relationships across national borders. And these connections can be social, economic, political, or cultural, and they often involve individuals who live in one country while still engaging with their country of origin. And that is why this is really very important to understand this transnational dynamics if we have to understand the diasporic community. It emphasizes the flow of people, ideas, goods, and practices across borders, challenging the traditional notion that people fully assimilate into one country and severe ties with their homeland. So, friends, while talking about different concepts like melting pot, mosaic, or salad bowl, we realize that the thinkers are critical of any idea of a monolithic culture where all other marginal cultures are forced to assimilate. And that was the main critic of the idea of a melting pot. And thinker after thinker has emphasized on the hybridity of identity or dynamic cultural exchange between different cultures, so that people in general can have an enriching and enabling experience wherever they are. So, this transnationalism takes this uh, discussion further, and it proposes an idea or a situation where people can simultaneously maintain their home culture with the host culture, or can negotiate between both of them, and can try to make this negotiation meaningful. So, if we talk about the foundational critics or thinkers who talk about this for the first time, we can talk about Nina Glick Seeler, Linda Bass, and Christina Santron Blanc, who introduced the idea of trans migrants. Who are trans migrants? They are migrants who develop and maintain multiple relationships, as I said, familial, economic, social, political, which spans borders. So, this is not confined to one particular uh, nation or border, but spans several borders. Portis, Garnizo, and Lando also, talk about uh, transnational practices as either broad based, like remittances and all, or narrow, that is limited to elites or entrepreneurs alone, while the broad based transnational practices uh, include all the common people and uh, practices that are part of it. They emphasize the idea that transnationalism is not universal, it's more active in certain communities, while the certain other communities are less responsive to this, or have less privileges as well. Um, Faggy Levitt also critiques it, questioning whether we are overusing transnationalism, arguing that not all immigrants are deeply transnational. So it will be a mistake if we think that this is something which comes naturally with the migration of people from uh, one border to another, because this has certain conditions, and these conditions govern to what extent the people or the diasporic community or a particular group will be able to, maintain ties with both the host and home countries. So Peggy Levitt introduces the idea of social remittances, which includes non-material things like ideas, norms, identities, uh, that are transferred back home. So if we uh, again take our discussion further, we can find that transnationalism is a concept that postulates multiple allegiances, affinities, emotional attachments, solidarities, obligations, identities, and sense of belonging which span international border. So we can find that people, without setting off or forgetting their home culture, can still belong and contribute meaningfully to the host culture. So they can have multiple allegiances or affinities and emotional attachments, because they build a family, they raise a family in, let's say, the host country, but in the home country also there is a family that is left behind. The parents may be there, the extended family may be there, and they can, you know uh, establish the same kind of emotional connect with their immediate family and their distant family. So transnationalism calls for this kind of dynamic, environment or space where, the home and the host identities are negotiated, and people try to strike a balance between them. So people who live transnational lives and, I quote, weave their collective identities out of multiple affiliations and positionings and link their cross cutting belongingness with complex attachments and multiple allegiances to issues, peoples, places, and traditions beyond the boundaries of their resident nation states. So, if we talk about the Indians in the US or Canada, well, these Indians, while they keep a close eye on whatever happens in America or the American political or government parlance, at the same time they take keen interest in the political scenario of their home country, and they participate in the debate and also express their opinions. Since borders are associated with power and movements across, they seem to be transgressive, and people live in social worlds that are stretched between or dually located in physical spaces and communities in two or more nation states, as McEwan observes. Bodil notes, while quoting such an instance from literature, Bodil notes Mrs. Ganguly, Asima Ganguly, one of the most important characters in the namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. Her name is Asima, which means without borders, somebody who does not have any limits. Asima, somebody who does not have any sima or limit. So, true to the meaning of her name, she will be without borders, without a home of her own, a resident everywhere and nowhere, as Jhumpa Lahiri concludes in the novel. And we find that she is truly a transnational citizen with no fixed home. So while they have migrated from Calcutta, and they have been living in the US for years, and they have also bought a house at the Pemberton Road in which she has been living. Finally, she decides that she will be dividing her time between India and US, and it seems that she has come to terms with the idea that she belongs to both the places or she belongs nowhere. So, she is a true example of transnational citizenship. Within social sciences, also, if we look at transnationalism, it might mean several things or might give us multiple meanings. It might refer to social morphology, how societies are formed or groups are formed, like diaspora and networks. It can be treated as a type of consciousness uh, of either belonging to both the places or belonging nowhere, as we'll find in diaspora, where people have multiple identities. It can be also treated as an avenue of capital, like we have transnational corporations and global monetary flows, where we find that the businesses are not confined to one particular nation, but they span across the nations. It can also be a site of political engagement, like we have international NGOs or diasporic politics. As I said, a diasporic subject might take keen interest in the politics of both the home country and the host country. It can also be treated as a mode of cultural reproduction, in which we can find syncretism or hybridity, where people create new art forms taking instances or elements from both the cultures of the host and the home nations. It can also refer to reconstruction of place and locality, like we can refer to them as trans localities. Wartobek, as we discussed earlier as well, mentions that transnational communities comprise migrants who retain deep and extended attachments to people, traditions, and movements located outside the boundaries of the nation state in which they reside. So, Wartobek, talks about communities being transnational uh, for those communities that maintain strong or active ties with the people or their families in the other nation as well. So if they are living in US, let's say the Indians living in US still maintain strong ties with their families back home, participate in traditions, in rituals, in all the family gatherings or family functions, sometimes virtually and sometimes physically. But we find that they maintain a very strong and active link with their home country, home culture, and home people. And such people are addressed as transnational communities by Wartowek. Thomas Feist, who is one of the most important thinkers of transnational migration studies, focuses on especially on transnational social spaces that are created and maintained by these migrant people. And he further talks about how these spaces influence mobility, identity, and social change across the borders. So, he says that transnational social spaces are formed by combinations of dynamic ties, positions in networks and organizations, and networks of organizations that reach across the borders of multiple states. He further suggests transnational communities build around political and religious identities last beyond the first generation of migrants, as they usually evolve with pre existing linkages, building new ones, and challenging existing arrangements such as citizenship and notions of acculturation. So, as I said earlier as well, transnational communities always maintain active, dynamic ties with their home culture as well, while participating wholeheartedly in the affairs of their host country. Kearney observes transnational migrants create transnational spaces that may have the potential to liberate nationals within them who are able to escape in part strong state hegemony. Feist, notes three concepts of my immigrant adaptation in receiving countries. Uh, the host country assimilates immigrants. Um, the host country supports ethnic pluralism based on multicultural citizenship and recognition of cultural differences. The host country encourages border crossing expansion of social space based on dual citizenship. Transnational syncretism will occur with a diffusion of culture and emergence of new types of cultural identities. So, to what extent a transnational subject will maintain an active tie or intense relationship or dynamic exchange with the home culture to a great extent depends on what kind of atmosphere is created in the host country, or their laws, their societies, their concerns, their attitude towards the migrants, their institutions. If these institutions, the people, they are all acting as enabling agents, this transnational exchanges will be more compared to those countries where such things are not promoted that way. So, transnational migration poses challenges to both the sovereignty of the nation states and to citizenship rules within nation states, because if somebody says that I belong to both the countries, sometimes it might create some kind of problem to what extent a person belongs to one or the other and who has a better claim. So, this certainly poses some challenges to both the nations. Transnationalism celebrates new anti essentializing concepts of subjectivity that emphasize plurality, mobility, hybridity, margins, and in between spaces, breaking down the barriers of ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. So, this very concept is based on what we can say an ideal premise where people will accommodate each other without having any reservations. But then in reality, it always looks very difficult. So, rather adhering to the models of melting pot or mosaic, this idea of transnationalism promotes cultural mixing, and identity formation, bringing together and mixing languages and practices from different and normally separated domains. They have the potential to disrupt dominant cultures by their out of placeness. So, this kind of a premise is inclusive rather than exclusive, and in any attempt at promoting a particular dominant culture is critiqued and is questioned by the transnational subjects, because they advocate for a visible, respectable space for their uniqueness, their culture, their traditions, and whatever unique they contribute to the host culture. So, culture then is located in a place of movement or a site of travel rather than in a fixed or controlled space, as Appadurai calls it as deterritorialization. So there is deterritorialization of these subjects. In that, again, earlier also we have talked about the thinkers going against the idea of a purist culture, and they have always vouched for uh, hybridity, which they find a suitable space for negotiating different cultures and coming up with a culture that is acceptable to all, which is all inclusive, and which is not governed by dominance and dominated, but more or less acts on equal premise. Uh, Autar Bara, we had a detailed discussion about her premises. She points out that processes of cultural fissure and fusion that underwrite contemporary forms of transcultural identities, which seriously problematize the idea of a person being a native or an insider. So, when we talk about transnational identities, our fixed notions of identity based on nationality of a person, or race of a person, or locality of a person is very much questioned, because it is believed that one can simultaneously be a citizen of couple of countries, or and can simultaneously have multiple identities. So transnational lives in themselves become a strategy of survival, because in our country we always say jaisa desh vaisa vesh. That means for survival you need to adapt, you need to respond to whatever is expected of you for survival in that particular circumstance. So these people, but one thing, never ever shun their culture completely and adapt to a new culture altogether. Rather, they try to negotiate it to the extent possible, where they partly retain their home culture and partly adapt to the host culture, and they rather thrive on a cultural mix or hybrid identity that really helps them. So, mobility is celebrated as a condition of postmodernity. Transnational waves include large numbers of relatively immobile persons and collectives. Uh, if we talk about the contemporary world, never before we have seen such dynamic global environment, and partly it is also possible because of sophisticated technology. So, interconnectedness of different cultural spaces and the overlapping of different cultural forms that create vitality and hold out the possibility of a progressive notion of culture and identity is very much a feature of the modern times. See, the second concept that I would like to talk about was developed by Homi K. Bhabha, and sometime back we had uh, a detailed discussion of Homi K. Bhabha, who is one of the most influential critics of, let's say, modern era, and unhomely. If we again try to break it, unhomely, homely wherever we feel comfortable, emotionally connected, and if we call it unhomely, this is simply the opposite feeling, when we don't feel the same kind of emotional connect. So, the feeling of estrangement, dislocation, or discomfort in one's own home, culture, or identity is unhomely. It's a feeling of unhomeliness. It's that eerie in between space where home no longer feels like home, or where identity feels fractured or unsettled. And this is something which is typical of the diasporic subjects. because diaspora is the site of a perpetual struggle or tension, where a diasporic subject is torn and tossed between different claims. And that is why, let's say I'm born in India, I own a home here, and then I move to some other country, I buy a house there, I get married, and I have children, and I raise them, and every day after work I get back to that home. I'm supposed to feel at home in that space, because that space for me provides me with emotional connect, physical comfort, and protection. But then what happens typically with the diasporic subjects is that they have this feeling of in betweenness. There is a home somewhere which is longed for, and throughout their lives they have nostalgia or nostalgic feeling for that home, but then that home is non existent at the moment in their life, and the home which they have built for themselves in a different land, thousands of miles away from their own home, they are reluctant to call it home. So the kind of feeling that is expected of them while at home is somehow missing. And again, it so happens that they come back to their original home just to find that they no longer belong to that. The kind of solace, the kind of emotional attachment that they felt once upon a time is missing now, because they are looking at their own home with a stranger's eye. So, this feeling of unhomeliness is typical of the diasporic community. I quote Homi Bhabha, who says, "The unhomely moment relates the traumatic ambivalences of a personal psychic history to the wider disjunctions of political existence." So, when we talk about unhomely, we are we have some definitions like Merriam-Webster uh, says it's lack of intimacy and warmth, aloofness, formality. Okay, so this is this kind of feeling which results in unhomeliness, feeling of being alienated or estranged even within one's own home. So, this is not a simple feeling, this may be a psychological state of mind, this may be an existential problem. It is also referred to as uncanny, a contrast between the secure and the homely interior and the fearful invasion of alien presence. So, post colonial writers use detailed descriptions of indigenous people, places, and practices to resist the stereotypes which the colonizers circulated in educational, legal, political, and social texts and settings. Therefore, many post colonial theorists argue that post colonial native and colonial a post colonial identity is necessarily a dynamic, constantly evolving hybrid of native and colonial cultures. So the diasporic people should not be treated as homesick, weak people, and their loyalty to the host culture should also not be doubted, believing that their homes are elsewhere, because they are capable of maintaining multiple identities, multiple homes. So home, claimed as a geographical space, a historical space, or an emotional sensory space, all of us know we attach a certain geography to our home. It has a certain historical significance in that it has housed us for generations. So the history of the family is attached to that, and we certainly share some kind of emotional bonding with that home. So, in post colonial diasporic literature, however, we find that the notion of home is unhomeliness, where we don't feel that home is a particular geographical locality which is fixed and unchanging, because people are on the move, and so this process of homing, unhoming, rehoming is always on. Diasporic people perceive nostalgic links and memories of their original home or homeland, which is characteristic features of diaspora. Stuart Hall points out the link between these communities and their homeland, or the possibility of a return to the past, are much more precarious than usually thought. And if we go through the diasporic texts, we'll find how ideally a diasporic subject feels nostalgic, always romanticizes his home in his home country, and always longs to go back. But when he or she really makes this journey, then they don't feel the same kind of excitement that they anticipated. So in one of the novels by Bharati Mukherjee, in The Tiger's Daughter, we find how Tara Banerjee, after coming back from US with her US husband, um, longing for home, and her friends finds that the home has completely changed, and she does not relate to people anymore the way she used to be, and she is not as welcome, and she does not feel the same kind of emotional connect with her friends as well. So, unhomely is not homelessness, but it means to feel not at home even if one is in one's own home. For the diasporic people, the sense of belonging to the family and the nation is ruptured, because they are always on the move. So, leaving this space called home or homeland and reconstructing home by moving beyond boundaries is a reality for them, and this is also required if they have to survive. So, according to Salman Rushdie, the idea of home is a damaged concept, as he remarks in his book East West, and I quote, "Home has become such a scattered, damaged, various concept in our present travels." Bhabha also remarks, home is not just one place, it is locations. He also conveys the estranging sense of the relocation of the home and the world, the unhomeliness that is the condition of extraterritorial and cross cultural initiations. So, in essay The World and the Home, he defines unhomely as a paradigmatic post colonial experience incorporating the sense of being alienated or coaxed into the shades of unfamiliarity within one's own home. So, it underpins the uncertainties of belonging and lingering urge for stability, highlighting in post colonial writing, as Mukherjee points out. Again, I quote Atar Bara, who, in response to what is home, says, on the one hand, home is a mythic place of desire in the diasporic imagination. In this sense, it is a place of return, even if it is possible to visit the geographical territory that is seen as a place of origin. On the other hand, home is also a lived experience of a locality, its sounds and smells, its heat and dust, balmy summer evenings, somber grey skies in the middle of the day, all this as mediated by the historically specific of everyday social relations. So, this expression demonstrates that the notion of home for diasporas is complex and ambivalent. The home of origin and the home of settlement juxtapose, and the diasporic identity can often draw much more on the experience of migrancy and settlement of making one's home than on a fixation to a homeland. So, home has surfaced as a problematic site strangled within new, unstable, discordant identities. that consistently revisit and rehearse their uncomfortable histories, problematizing a troubled nation's post colonial consciousness. So, the unhomely is a kind of situation where recesses of the domestic space become sites of history's most intricate invasions, and in that displacement, the borders between home and world become confused, and uncannily, the private and the public become part of each other, forcing upon us a vision that is as divided as it is disorienting. So, Okai rightly remarks that unhomely is not simply the strange intervention and sense of being spooned out of a sense of belonging, it is also making home that disquieting and non specializable nomadic condition. So, the post colonial concept of the unhomely home functions as a locus of discontent and as a systematic psychological lacuna in the sensibilities of belonging, where we find that there is no possibility of belonging to one particular space or one particular home. And thus, I quote Aman and Dalsted, who say migration entails multiple relocations and dislocations, as well as various homings and unhomings, which are both temporal and mutually interdependent. Each homing carries within itself a desire for a sense of belonging, locatedness, and security, whereas each unhoming implies losing that sense of belonging and recognizing the strangeness of what at first seemed familiar. So, these are the references, friend. So, these concepts of unhomely and transnationalism are central to our understanding of the diasporic phenomenon, and we discussed it in detail, and these are the references. Thank you very much for your company. In the next class, we talk about some more concepts that help us understand the sociology, the psychology, the politics, and the creativity of diaspora. Thank you very much.